Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. Really trying to handle this heat wave that we have going on here. Not unwelcome. I'll say that we had, these winters and we complain about them and, we have bad weather, but I'm not complaining about the heat. I'm just saying a little steamy right now, but I hope everybody out there is doing well. And Tim, how are you today?
Doing great over here. Thanks a lot for asking. Very excited to introduce this conversation with big-time author Megan Abbott. And she has written a bunch of books, and she's got a new book that just came out in June of 2025. It's called Dorado Drive, Lance, and it is a fictional story, but it's based on some real-life crimes. And the 2010 murder of 48-year-old Barbara Beach Hamburg from Madison, Connecticut is part of the real-life crimes that we speak about in this conversation.
And it was interesting when we were contacted about having Megan on the show. Initially, we were a little apprehensive because this is a fictional account, and we try to keep everything true crime, true fact here, and make sure that there's a topic that the listeners can relate to. So we never want to cross that line and get into the fiction territory and not bring ourselves back out of it. But it was great because they insisted, no, you need to have her on because she does so much research into her books that are based on actual crimes, and she gives them a different type of voice. She gives the victims a different type of voice, and she really does an amazing amount of research when she's writing her fictional accounts. This was no different. The book Dorado Drive is great. It speaks to more than just somebody's murder. It's also a statement on these things that happen in society where people feel the need to join these groups, not cults, but like Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes, to be a part of these organizations that are founded and directed by, no other way to put it, like lecherous people who will promise you the world, take the money, and then leave other people out to dry. And that's the underlying theme to this book and to this conversation, really, which kind of caught me by surprise.
Yeah, really interesting conversation with Megan. You can definitely tell she's well-researched in, the case of Barbara Beach Hamburg, but also many other cases, because we did get into some other cases as well. So check out her books. MeganAbbott.com is the place to go to check out her books. She's written a bunch. She's very prolific and really wonderful to speak with.
Also very evident that she is living in New York, and just want to give people a heads up there. There's some New York sounds, as she calls it, during this conversation. We did our best to make sure that they weren't overpowering, just only a couple of things. So when you're listening to it, just keep in mind, a train is not running through her apartment. Everything's okay. Maybe the train was running through her apartment. I don't know.
Well, we didn't see the rest of her apartment, so we can't say for sure, but
very well could have been then. Yeah, you're right. Could have been off camera. But Tim, people can see us in person, on or off camera, when they go to CrimeCon in Denver this year, September 5th, 6th, and 7th. We're going to be there. If you are thinking about going and you just needed that one little thing to convince you, maybe this is it, use the promo code Crawlspace. When you go to purchase your standard pass at crimecon.com, you'll get 10% off by using the promo code Crawlspace at checkout, and you'll get 100% of us at CrimeCon.
9% of us.
The German 9? Like no percent of us?
No, I was saying 9, like less than 10%.
Less than 10. Okay.
Yeah.
There'll be a percentage of us.
All right, everyone. So check us out on Spotify. We have got a video show over there. Crawlspace is a video show on Spotify. And also, we have relaunched a subscription service. You can connect right through our Crawlspace page on Spotify. So check it out there. And Lance, we're going to break quick for commercial here, but everyone should be following us on social media as well at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Megan Abbott, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Good. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you on the show. Your name is synonymous with prolific writing. You have written so much, and I'm wondering why this is the first time you've been on the show. So, again, thank you for coming on. For anybody, for the handful of people who don't know who you are, can you fill the listeners in?
I've written 12 crime novels, which is crazy. Though I will say crime novelists are very prolific. So I have friends who've written twice the number of books, even 3 times the number of books I have written, but almost always loosely inspired by a true crime. That's sort of my wheelhouse. I grew up loving true crime, especially as a way to uncover character and psychology and place. I've always found them to be the richest stories. And it's often a crime that it's not necessarily the crime itself I'm interested in, but there's some angle in it that interests me. So that's always sort of at the beginning of all of my books. And I do screenwriting as well, but usually also in that space of inspired by true crime.
Very cool. And where does that love of true crime come from?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I talk about it with my therapist every week because it was really young, and I know I'm not alone in that. But now I know I'm not alone because we talk about it much more openly in the culture. But when I was a kid, and I have many crime writer friends who had the same experience, it really was, this is the days when you would go to the drugstore and there'd be like the spin rack of paperbacks and they'd be full of true crime. And it really was getting helter-skelter. My parents bought it for me, I'm sure. They were very permissive. They thought anything you're reading is good because you're reading. But that book really knocked me out. I've talked to other crime novelists about it too. It was really the story itself, how it seemed to peel back the curtain of what, of life and show you some real darkness. And then there were the pictures that are so upsetting in the middle of the book that have parts that are thankfully blacked out, but then you kind of fill it in as a kid in your head. In case anyone doesn't know, I'm sure anyone listening to this knows, but it's the Manson murders. It haunted me. I read it so many times. I think there was no going back after that. It was all like books about the Black Dahlia, and it was a lot of originally LA adjacent true crimes, and then across the board.
That's really incredible because I did also have that book Helter Skelter as a kid, and it took forever just for me to get past the fear I felt reading the title. Yes. Helter Skelter as a child, or not a child, but as like a 13, 14-year-old kid, it's like, that's about as creepy of 2 words put together as you can put together. And that really solidified something in me as well.
Totally. It's hard. We can't capture because we weren't alive when the song existed without the context, right? So now, this was this Beatles song, and it's this pretty creepy song on its own, I suppose, just because it's sort of an alarming song. But they're forever yoked now. And there was something about even the font of it on the cover of the book, which looked like written in blood and so harrowing. And then it was sort of this fear about listening to the whole White Album, and that you would, I don't know, this sort of feeling of contagion. If you opened the book, if you started reading, you would be infected, and in fact I was. So
right, I'm gonna just geek out on this a little bit more. I wasn't familiar with the Beatles song when I first got the book, like you said, some people, you learn about the Beatles song after. The first time I heard Helter Skelter as a song was Motley Crue's version of it. Oh. So for the longest time, I thought Motley Crue I thought they were the writers of Helter Skelter. And then I found out it was a Beatles song. And then it just got creepier.
No, it is. It's sort of like fear of dirty hippies. It's sort of this weird connotations you get in your head. And also this notion, like with the Paul's Dead stuff, as a kid, you're very fascinated that there could be like these conspiracies that you have been forbidden access to, and now you're uncovering them. So I think a lot of it is that as a child, you're sort of protected from these things, and now you feel like you're getting some secret hidden truth, which I think it's almost like the dark fairy tale.
For sure. And I'm just going to, again, just go on this same topic, the same wavelength for a little bit longer. You said that there was something about the psychology of writing true crime and learning about true crime. That does fall in line with what you were just talking about with Helter Skelter and how that gets into your head. What is it about the psychology of true crime as opposed to another genre that you think is more infectious than another?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's certainly because you're seeing more psychological disorder, right? Because it's sort of often creates these situations and troubled people, but really also maybe even more interested in our capacity, our resilience as people. This comes up in true crime a lot, of survivors, of family members, about how you get through or over something like that. That always fascinated me. There's always discussion about why women in particular are interested in true crime more than men, like dramatically so. And there's all these theories about it that I don't really buy, like that they're kind of to tell you how to be safe. I don't think there's anything to make you safe from the Manson family. But what I do think they do is reflect a lot of stigmatized areas in what women talk about: domestic abuse, violence in the home, rage, female rage. There's all these sort of forbidden topics that I feel like you get to see in true crime. And then you get to see the psychology behind all of that, why people stay in dysfunctional relationships, why they behave the way they do. I think that stuff has always fascinated me.
Tell us about your new book, Dorado Drive.
I was already interested, I guess, like a lot of us, the last few years, there's been this sort of flood of docuseries, true crime docuseries about MLMs, multi-layer marketing schemes, multi-level marketing schemes, and pyramid schemes, various grifters and hustlers. There's just been a real rise of them. So I was already interested in writing something about that. And then I had heard about and then seen the docuseries Murder at Middle Beach about a Connecticut woman, Barbara Hamburg, who was murdered violently. May or may not be connected. Doesn't seem like it is, that she was involved in this thing called the gifting tables. It was essentially a pyramid scheme. And then they ended up two of the women ended up going to prison for it. So it was sort of exposed because of the murders. That story fascinated me. And so I started to think about why these suburban women, because this is increasingly the case, have become involved. It turns out not to be that new. It goes back to Tupperware and Mary Kay. Women who maybe had been at home to raise their kids. They had either had a career and put it on the side or never had a career. And then they have a financial crisis. So they're trying to find ways to make money on their own. So the book is set in my hometown of Grosse Pointe, which is just outside of Detroit. Just basically got decimated when the auto industry collapsed. And so there were a lot of people that had a lot of money and then didn't have any money anymore. So it's sort of like a good setting for that kind of situation to unfold.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the mindset of people, especially women back then, and the decision to unify around something like Mary Kay or Tupperware, and how does that
happen?
Is that like a statement for independence?
I think it is. That's often, especially now, that's often the line they'll use to recruit people, is almost a feminist messaging about empowering yourself. Some of them are even called, women empowering women and names like that. You've given your power to a man for too long. You can control your own money. They always rise in times of economic uncertainty, which is why I think early COVID is when we saw this latest influx, and now definitely because of the economic uncertainty at the moment, people get anxious. So I think for a lot of women, money is not just about money, though it's always also about money, but it's about security, anxiety. It's about independence. It's about, in some ways, revenge in some cases against the husband who took everything from you. So I think it's connected to all these really deep emotions. And of course, always to our childhood, which is what we all have very specific ideas about money that are wired into us from how money was or wasn't talked about in our family and whether we felt it was abundant or scarce. And that stuff never goes away. My novel of Dorado Drive is three sisters, so they all had the same childhood, but they all respond to that anxiety in different ways. So the psychology about women and money, really anyone that is involved in these schemes interests me, but particularly why women. It's also women are just often better at it, quite frankly, because they have social networks that men don't always have. They have parent-teacher association, or they have former sorority sisters. It's very common to see former sorority sisters recruiting one another. There's a lot of sort of capacity, I think, to recruit. And of course, all of these depend entirely on recruitment. That's what makes a pyramid scheme a pyramid scheme.
Wow, so many things there that resonated. One was the discussion of money as you're growing up, and I think a lot of people, ourselves included, can remember moments in your family where they tell you it's going to be a small Christmas or something like that, and bills are always the bane of everyone's existence. So you grow up with this love-hate relationship towards money. That made me think of the story about Anna Delvey. And you mentioned COVID, this influx of all of these con artists, women, who's the woman who made the blood pill?
Oh yeah, Elizabeth Holmes. Yeah.
Elizabeth Holmes, yeah. I always think about those things, and it does make me remember parts of my childhood about the problems with money and how this might have been the case with some of these people. But what if these women were men in these situations? When I was watching the fictionalized version, I was wondering, this wouldn't even be much of a story if this was a man. This would be a man doing good business. So I don't know how that's related to the childhood thing, but it just all kind of came together in my head that way. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it is. I thought about this so much, and it's even in the dialogue in my book, because I think there is this notion that, well, isn't this what the stock market is? Don't men do this all the time? And the sort of loopholes to get around different laws. Don't successful men do this every day? Doesn't every corporation live by their tax shelters and the way they move money around? And I think that is really true. I think it's, and you see it a lot in the media coverage when they do get exposed. There's something kind of sneering about the women, that the women should be doing something like this, as if it was so obscene. Whereas men are praised for it, even when it falls apart, because somehow they're exemplify the great American, pull himself up by his bootstraps, and in ways that I think some of the recruiters use with women in this group. Do you think your husband doesn't do stuff like this? Your husband pays your taxes. Have you ever looked at your taxes before you sign them? Your husband has you just sign your loan papers, and do you ever look at that? So I think it really gets tied up into it. And I think it connects to childhood in terms of the gender dynamics of your household. If the father was the one in charge of money, if he was anxious about it, if one of the parents was a big spender and the other was a saver, all that stuff is really baked in.
Amazing. You just managed to take my convoluted connection of thoughts and make it into something that was coherent. So I appreciate that. You're hired.
So when you were researching the murder of Barbara Beach Hamburg, that sort of idea of a pyramid scheme does come up in that docuseries and in that case. So can you tell us about how you sort of took what really happened in that case and I guess fictionalized it for Dorado Drive?
I think the element that so interested me was she had a domestic situation that was very volatile, in this case with an ex-husband who was the sort of author of her financial problems, because they had split, and he's just one of those people that would just make a lot of money and then lose all their money. And he wasn't paying child support at the time of her death, and it turned out he had been taking money from the trust fund of the children. They were supposed to be in court the day she was murdered, which also, though, actually gave him the perfect alibi, because he was in court when she was murdered. Because when you watch it, he seems the most likely suspect. As in the real case, it's the way to deal with this lack of money. She had a kid going to college, another one with some emotional issues. She needed to make money, and she was very good at this thing called the gifting tables. Honestly, when I wrote my novel, I have a different pyramid scheme called The Wheel. I had to explain to so many people about why it was illegal, because it doesn't sound illegal. I mean, this is the trick of, as opposed to MLMs, where you have to buy $20,000 of products that then you have to sell to make any money, these are a little more insidious. There is no product. You just have to bring, first time you come to a meeting or a party, as there were often parties, you have to bring a buy-in. They don't call it that. They call it like your dues, your initiation fee. You bring, say, $5,000. And then if you keep bringing in new members, why is that illegal? They're willingly bringing in money. And so that's with the gifting tables. None of the women seemed to feel they were doing anything illegal, and that fascinated me. So I really wanted to explore that and to have a situation that would be explicable about why especially she needed the money because of this ex-husband who was dripping. So those were the elements I pulled for the book, and that continued to fascinate me. And then I ended up reading a lot of the indictments for a lot of these pyramid schemes that did get prosecuted. And what they do is tell you exactly how it worked. And of course, the reason it's illegal is you have to declare gifts to the IRS. And they were claiming that each gift was $5,000. That's less than the threshold that you have to declare a gift. But if you add them up, it's well over the threshold. You definitely have to declare it. So they're not reporting any of the income on their tax returns. And they also always get them on wire fraud, which is just like they do with the mob, because they're communicating about how the language they should use, how they shouldn't deposit all the cash at the same time at the bank, because then the bank has to report that you know, there's a limit. I learned so much. I could definitely start my own pyramid scheme because I would avoid all these things. Rule number 1, which if anyone's ever seen Goodfellas knows, never talk on the phone.
You're looking into all of this. Like, how much did you know about pyramid schemes and that sort of insidious, like, lecherous type world?
No, nothing. I mean, I can't say I hadn't seen it. I guess I'd sort of been aware of it and had certainly been interested in these. I'm from Michigan, and that's where Amway, one of the big original MLMs, started. I've certainly been aware of it. I think when we all know someone who tried to sell us their product, right? Their leggings or their essential oils or jewelry. But that was the extent of it. So I really did a crash course. I mean, I read so much about it. It's organized crime is what it is. But it doesn't seem that way. And I do think people can really trick themselves into thinking that there's nothing wrong with this. But of course, anything that seems too good to be true, it probably is.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
In the true story of Barbara Beach Hamburg's murder, do you think this pyramid scheme had something to do with her murder?
You know, it's still unsolved, so we don't know. Since the documentary aired, her son made the documentary. I recommend anyone watch it. It's an excellent one. But he's tried to get the police to release their files. He did the FOIA to get released. He got some of them, but not all of them. But because it's an active case, even though it seems pretty cold, they have not released any information that they have. DNA was collected. All we know is the DNA did not match the husband. My gut says that it isn't connected, that there's just this unhappy circumstance. If you watch the documentary, there's some other suspects, and there's other ways that it imagines that the husband could have, hired someone, essentially. And I don't really have a working theory on it, but when I get inspired by true crime, I do tend to focus on unsolved ones because it gives you much more imaginative play. My novel works out differently, and it's not a cold. You do find out what happens, but real true crime is much messier. With a crime novel, you have to give everyone a satisfying ending, but real life does not often provide them. So we may never know. The police have made comments suggesting they have a suspect, but they haven't produced anything yet.
Okay, so as you're looking into this and you're basing this off of Barbara's murder, how do you make those subtle or not so subtle changes or differences between her murder and the crimes that are committed in your book? So if you can take us to what her murder consisted of, and how does that differ from the way you describe your storyline in your book?
As I was talking about before, one of the things that it's not usually the crime itself, but these other elements that always interested me. And one of the elements is how upsetting the crime scene was. And I don't repeat the crime scene, but it was upsetting because her sister and her teenage daughter found her. And that's something that I I do have in the book, though the other circumstances of the scene are different, where the body was found, what had been done to the body, etc. I read a lot about the real life case in the early stages before I've started writing, and then I don't look at it again. First of all, I don't want to be insensitive. I don't want to replicate upsetting things. I have created characters that don't exist in real life, and they have minds of their own, so they do things that, they want to do. So it morphs slowly and then dramatically, such that in some ways feels almost like I have to remind myself what the connection is, other than that it was a woman in a divorce who was involved in a pyramid scheme. But it's sort of a slow process of disconnecting myself from the limitations. At first, the limitations are what's interesting, and then the limitations just go away because I've created a world of my own.
And you mentioned you don't repeat the crime scene. Is that something that is consistent with your other books too?
I think so. I'm trying to remember if, I suppose there's one of my books, my second book, which is called The Song Is You, which is based on the unsolved murder of Jean Spangler, similar to the Black Dahlia case, around the same. Some people speculate it was the same killer, but like a starlet who was found, or who was never found, disappeared. It was suspected of being murdered. And that was the only time I ever kept it fairly close. Much like James Ellroy's book, The Black Dahlia, I used the real name of the victim and the details of the case. But after doing that, and that was in some ways because it was so long ago, that there was no one alive involved in it anymore. It also started to make me uncomfortable, and I never did it again. Just something about who am I to intrude on that, to be so literal about a victim. I know, though I read all those books, I will say it's no judgment on the authors that do it. But for me, for my creative process, I need to move away from it.
Okay, cool. That was actually sort of my question, which was like, is it more so that you're able to open up your creative window to, make the story into something that's more unique and independent to your storytelling?
Yes, I say ultimately that's the bigger thing. It doesn't really ever take off if I haven't found my own story. If I can't voice the characters, I've started things and they haven't gone more than 40 pages because I've been too caught in the real life circumstances. And sometimes it's so far that no one's ever noticed that I had an inspiration in real life. That's how far it can move, because it just found a different direction. I became interested in some part of it that I had invented, and then that became more real to me. It's sort of the embarrassing woo-woo part of fiction, is that, you start to feel like your own characters do what they want to do, when, of course, that's not true. I'm making them do these things. But yeah, I think that's when you have liftoff, is when you've moved away.
Can you tell us a little bit more about The Song Is You? Because recently... Well, let me back up a little bit. So we're in true crime, and the Black Dahlia comes up a lot. A few years ago it came up here and there, but we had been kind of consistently saying it's a case that we never really dug really deep into. But lately we're digging really deep into it. It's like every other day something comes to our attention about the Black Dahlia. We had a guest on who wrote a play about Elizabeth, and we're going to have a guest on who wrote a new book trying to connect two murders. And now you've just said that the character in your book is based on someone who might have been a victim of the person who murdered Elizabeth Short. Can we just talk about that book for a little bit longer? Because I feel like I actually texted Tim, the Podverse is telling us something. We need to talk more about the Black Dahlia.
Yeah, I feel like you can't avoid it in true crime for too long. It's like the Zodiac is the other one. Inevitably, you're going to get there because they're the great unsolved cases. I think in both cases, but especially Black Dahlia, is one that will never be solved. And I think it makes it endlessly fascinating for that reason. It will never go away. It's not like the Golden State Killer. Now we know who did that. All the mystery's gone. We're all very glad that they caught him, but there's not going to be DNA for Black Dahlia. They're not going to find, no one's going to confess. Everyone is long dead. Some of the books about the Black Dahlia, especially Steve Hodell's first book about The Black Dahlia Avenger, I think it's called. But other books have too talked about this spate of sex crimes right after soldiers returning from war in LA. So you start to see and there's so many of them. Comes up in James Ellroy's memoir too, because his mother, which is about his mother's murder. There was something going on in the culture with the return of men who had been through this catastrophic experience, and a little bit the notion that women had taken all their jobs, right? Women had entered the workforce, had making their own money again. And so there's sociological theories about why all of a sudden there were all these sex crimes in LA in 1945, 46, 47, et cetera, which is, the Black Dahlia era. And so I think that sort of makes people think that there's actually a connection between all these crimes themselves, literally, that it's the same person. Some of it is fairly persuasive, a few of them, because the MO is very similar. The victims have a very similar look. Jean Spangler is another sort of brunette beauty along the lines of Elizabeth Short as a starlet, mingling with Hollywood. I mean, actually much more successfully than Elizabeth Short, because she had been in some movies and she had dated Kirk Douglas, who was one of the suspects. They seemed to be mirrors of the same case. So they never found her. They found her purse, and it had a note in it that mentioned that she was going to see this doctor. And so that's one of the primary suspects in the Black Dahlia. Probably already got into this is Dr. George Hodel. And there's other doctors. There were a lot of doctors that were active abortionists in LA at that time. So there's a very likely theory that she died during a botched abortion and they got rid of her body. As we know from the way Elizabeth Short, the way her body was treated, it also could be quite likely that a doctor killed her because of the knowledge of organs, etc. So this is so gruesome, but this is the world you live in too. So I think so all this stuff was really interesting to me, and I was fascinated with the Black Dahlia case, but said no one needs another book about that. Little did I know there were going to be 20 more to come. So the Jean Spangler case, because it was another cold case and fascinating and dealt with some of the same issues, was a place to kind of play and imagine myself into her head, and to imagine an ending, because there is no ending in real life. So it's sort of like you give some kind of closure that doesn't exist again in real life. Alex Winter, the actor and filmmaker, who I guess is most famous for Bob and Ted's Excellent Adventure, but also has made these amazing documentaries about Hollywood. He's writing an adaptation of The Song Is You now. He was interested in all this stuff.
Really?
And it had fallen off. I've had a lot of my stuff optioned and adapted, but this one no one had touched because it's expensive to make a period movie. So in terms of what you're saying about Black Dahlia coming back into ether, I do feel like there's something going on now that makes us want to return to it and explore it. That's a long answer, but I could talk about Black Dahlia forever.
That's all good. It's all good. We could talk about Alex Winter forever.
Yes, he's amazing.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
And you said something about this story not having an end, and the story of Barbara Hamburg. She doesn't have an end yet. I'm wondering if that's more appealing to you when you are looking at these stories. Is it more appealing to you to give them closure, even if it is fictionalized?
I think so. I think, no one wants to read a crime novel where you don't find out who did it. It's just a fact. I mean, I'm often interested in that. In a lot of art, I think ambiguity is interesting, but it is a sort of feature of the genre. Also, I feel like the same freedom, because it's an unsolved case that gives me all this place to fictionalize and move it away, also gives me a way to give it the thing it doesn't have in real life. I mean, James Ellroy famously says that closure is BS. He doesn't say BS, and I do think that's true. In real life it is, but we can give a version of it. Though I also will say, in all my books, I try to have the ending have an answer, but also more questions, because that is also closer to real life too. Nothing's that simple. We'll never really know anything about why people do the things they do.
Yeah, and I think that's true about closure as well. You know, we speak with survivors of crime and victims themselves, and they kind of say that too. And it can be decades, and, you know, it's not like that heals, really. It's just a loss that they have to learn how to live with instead of wait for it to heal.
Yeah, I was just thinking that this morning, hearing about the Idaho situation, the plea deal with the Brian Kohlberger took that plea deal, so he won't be executed. And there was a lot of talk about, what about the families? They want to see they wanted a trial, and they perhaps wanted capital punishment, even knowing who did it and confessing and etc. I don't think that is ever going to give you the thing you want.
I agree. And isn't that weird about Kohlberger, who can so easily, you know, allegedly, actually, I guess not allegedly anymore, but he can so easily brutally murder 4 kids, and then he's afraid of death himself. Like, what a coward.
Absolutely. I mean, it does, to bring it full circle. That is a sort of helter-skelter scenario, right? It's a home invasion and a slaughter of young people. Similarly, orchestrated by a coward, Manson wasn't even there for the first set of murders. That really shows you what's at the heart of these really ill people. He is sort of, I mean, there's going to be so many, there's already been a couple books, there's going to be so many more, there'll be the more documentaries, but he's sort of a different breed that we haven't quite seen, the true crime enthusiast who becomes the killer. We've seen versions of that, but this feels like an extreme situation when you're actually taking classes. And so it'd be really interesting to sort of read more about it. If he even is going to give an interview, and if we should even believe anything he says. But those are always the questions that come up.
Yeah, I remember not believing that at first when these murders first happened, and you'd see that online. It's like, oh, he was a criminology student. It's like, no, he wasn't. That seems way too on the nose. And you look into it and see some stuff on social media. It's like, I don't even know if that's true or not. You know, and it turns out a lot of it actually was true about him. Yeah.
When you consume a lot of true crime, there's certain things that you know to be true. It's often the one pregnant woman is murdered. It's almost always the husband or the boyfriend, etc. But in the few cases where it's not, you really have to check yourself. It is sort of because the patterns only are patterns. They're only patterns. They're not always answers. And I don't know how much we're really going to find out in this case. I mean, he's not going to get a book deal. He's going to be in prison.
I'm wondering, as we're talking about all of this crime and details of violence, and what Kohlberger did was brutal, and if we got into the actual attacks themselves, they're graphic, and we probably would have to put a disclaimer at the top of the episode. And the same thing happened with Barbara Hamburg's murder. I mean, that was sudden and graphic and brutal, and, you know, she's like attacked with a hammer, and she has broken arms and everything. And at some point when you're writing your characters, like, how are you wrapping your head around that? How does that not impact you? Because in a way, and again, like, it sounds like, I don't know, like too emotional or something, but like on my end, but like, you're creating your characters, and now you have to like decide how you're going to brutally murder them.
Yes. No, it's the most upsetting part of it. It's the part that really makes you question why you're doing what you're doing. They're the hardest scenes to write. How I usually handle it, I try to describe as little as possible. I'm always looking for that small detail that conveys how cruel an act this is, something that makes it very human. One of the things that I did take from the Barbara Hamburg is that she was found with cushions over her body, which, if you spread any true crime, those things really do mean a lot. It's someone who's usually ashamed of what they've done. Occasionally it's to hide it, but this case, in the real life case, the body was found outside, so you're not really hiding. So it also suggests that it's not a contract killer. They don't really do like that. So, but the detail also seems so moving and upsetting to me this happens often, some weird attempt to comfort the person you've just killed or to not have to look at their face. All you have to do is say one sentence to describe that. The reader will fill in all the rest. You don't have to go into detail about wounds. I mean, I can't say my books don't have violence in them, they do, but I'm not interested in gore or the kind of pornography of violence that we so often see. I often have to, as you know, you do have to read that stuff to know inevitably what. I don't want it in the book. I don't think people read the book for that. They want to connect to the victim experience, to the family experience. They want to understand what's happened. So I try to focus on those human details.
Are there any other current cases happening in the true crime sphere that you might consider writing about in the future?
Well, I think somebody's definitely going to beat me to this. So often there's more than one novel about a case. But of course, the Karen Read case has dominated my thoughts in the last many months.
Karen Read? I haven't heard of this.
Tell me about her story. I've been following that so long. And she's so interesting, and her, the victim is very interesting, but mostly that whole scene, by which I mean social scene of those cops and their wives and girlfriends, and the drinking that was going on, and all of that stuff. I mean, that stuff is gold to me. So I would be very curious. The thing is, you have to figure out an angle on it. You can't just say, especially with a case like that that's been so covered, you'd have to really do something interesting with it. But the part I probably would take is how the escalating danger of all these cops, these hyper toxic Boston cops, drinking, 3 times their weight in booze, getting in their cars and going to after parties and sexting with one another's girlfriends. I mean, it's great. I would love to write about it, but I probably would change the crime itself even more so, because it's been too overexposed. Or wait 10 years when people have forgotten it.
Oh, I don't know if people are going to forget it. I feel like this is like one of the most touchstone moments in true crime. There's going to be docuseries and Netflix and books and differing opinions that are going to be distributed in the media in some form. It kind of reminds me of the Joey Buttafuoco, Amy Fisher story. And
yes.
Remember back then there were 3 made-for-TV movies that came out at the same time?
Yes.
And we thought that was crazy. I was like, Alyssa Milano is playing her, Drew Barrymore is playing her, and they all had this different take on it. I feel like that's going to be Karen Read.
I think so, even more content, because that we knew what happened. It was just salacious circumstance.
Exactly. Yes.
Read, I personally don't think she did it, but even not knowing she did it, I don't know who did it, how it happened, if the dog was involved. I don't know any of these things for sure. They botched that crime scene so much. I don't know if we'll ever know, so it can go on forever. So yeah, I do think it could be one of those touchstones. And also, she is such a divisive figure. I think I'm going to leave that one alone.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Megan, for hanging out with us today and telling us about your process and about your new book, Dorado Drive. Where do you tell folks to get your books?
Yeah, you can get it at your favorite bookseller or any place you get books. Barnes & Noble, your local indie, of course, Amazon. It's everywhere. So, and you also have a website. And I'm on social media like everybody else. So.
Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you so much. Anytime you want to come back on, love talking about the psychology and the inner workings of the, human psyche when it comes to true crime. So we appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be catching up on your back episodes. Looking forward to your future Black Dahlia episode.